Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new members of our Patreon family, Jessica and NorCal Pal, which is fun to say. Thank you all so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us remain 100% listener supported and ad-free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. If you're interested in supporting Boring Books for Bedtime and finding out more about the perks available to subscribers, including exclusive episodes, full books, and giveaways found nowhere else, you'll find a link to Patreon in the show description. You'll also find a link to buymeacoffee.com, where you can support us with a one-time tip, no subscription required. I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight, after several listener requests, we're returning to a book I had completely forgotten about. Let's relax on the South American Tour by Annie S. Peck, M.A., author of A Search for the Apex of America, illustrated chiefly from photographs by the author. First published in 1913 by George H. Doring Company and Hodder and Stoughton, London. Let's pick up right where we left off at the beginning of Chapter 3 as we approach the shores of Panama. Let's begin. Chapter 3: The Isthmus, the Canal, Cologne. 2 days from Jamaica, 6, 7, 8, or 9 from New York, one arrives at Cologne, eager to witness the wonderful operations now well nigh concluded, or to behold the finished work, when great ships shall through a broad channel among green hills and islands sail onward to the serene Pacific. Everyone knows of the marvelous transformation on the isthmus during the last 10 years, but the most imaginative person now arriving for the first time will hardly fancy what it was like in 1903. Cologne, once called the most repulsive, disagreeable, filthy hole of a place in all Christendom, though always a pretty picture from the sea, is at present fair enough on land. The climate only remains unchanged. It still rains and rains, 130 inches a year, not all the time even in the rainy season, which it is very apt to be, as that continues 8 months, from the 1st of May to January, leaving a dry season of only 4. Even in this period it is liable to rain, so it behooves everyone to be provided with raincoat and umbrella, if not with overshoes. Everywhere there are good walks, and in the town's paved streets, beyond which the tropical sun soon dries the mud. The agreeableness of the Isthmian climate as a whole and in various localities, if to some extent indicated by figures, is largely a matter of individual temperament. With little difference in temperature, Cologne has double the rainfall of Panama, with a corresponding excess of humidity. Yet happily for the welfare of the great work and the workers, it has been the fashion on the isthmus for everyone to have local pride, to like his own station the best, whether on either shore or in one of the pleasant villages along the line. It is genuine summer weather all the year around, not excessive heat like our days in the 90s and 100s, but mostly in the plain 80s by day, with cooler and comfortable nights. Historical. This section of the New World was first visited in 1501 by Columbus, who touched at Nombre de Dios and Portobello, east of Cologne, perhaps sailing into Limon Bay. This he certainly did in 1502, naming the place Puerto Naos, Navy Bay, as it was called until recent years. It is just 400 years ago, September 25, 1513, that Vasco Núñez de Balboa first saw the Great Pacific, then named the South Sea, not, as often said, from the hill near Gorgona called Balboa, more properly the Cerro Gigante, but from another 120 miles east, as he was crossing the San Blas country. Thence he continued to the Bay San Miguel of Darien. This bold explorer, like many another, fared badly. He was beheaded a few years later at the age of 44. In 1519, the site of an Indian fishing village near the farther shore was selected by Governor Pedro Rios as that of his future capital, and in 1521 it was made a city by royal decree. This was Old Panama, which soon became a place of great wealth and luxury, as for a century or more the rich treasures of Peru passed by this route to Old Spain. Yet it suffered many vicissitudes from fires, buccaneers, and insurrections, till at length, when its prosperity had already begun to wane on account of the ships going by the Strait of Magellan, it was captured, plundered, and destroyed by the freebooter Henry Morgan, January 19, 1671, never to be rebuilt. January 21, 1673, the new city of Panama, about 4 miles distant, was dedicated. Until 1821, the isthmus was under the dominion of Spain, and after that, in spite of numerous insurrections, remained a part of the country of New Granada, later Colombia, until its sudden practical transfer to the United States. On November 3, 1903, its independence was proclaimed. On the 6th, the infant republic was recognized by the United States, and on February 26, 1904, a treaty with the United States was signed by which it became a protectorate with a position similar to that of Cuba. As early as 1527, an explorer from Panama City went from the Pacific up the Rio Grande Valley, crossed the divide by Culebra, and sailed down the Chagres River to the Atlantic Ocean. Soon this was a popular route, to sail up the Chagres to a point 15 miles from Panama, and continue by land to that city. As early as 1534, the idea of a canal occurred to that great monarch Charles V, who had a route surveyed. Pronounced too expensive even for his great wealth, the project was abandoned. But 381 years later, a far greater canal than he dreamed of will be opened in the very same track which his surveyors followed. The French Canal. Various canal projects in the meanwhile have been cherished, though the building of the Panama Railroad, 1850 to 1855, had a deterrent effect on the enterprise. But in May 1876, the government of Colombia made a concession for the work to a French company, and operations soon followed. After surveys by Lieutenant Wise, a sea-level canal from Limon Bay to Panama by the pass at Culebra, meaning snake, was decided upon. January 10, 1881, Ferdinand de Lesseps, promoter of the Suez Canal, made the ceremonial beginning at the Pacific entrance. And January 20th, 1882, the first excavation was begun near the Continental Divide, where, in the section called the Culebra Cut, work has proceeded ever since, except from 1888 to 1891. The French were badly handicapped by disease, Colombian interference, incomplete plans, and insufficient funds, and were injured at home by rumors of sickness, extravagance, etc. In 1887, the sea level plan was transformed to a lock level. And February 4, 1889, the company went into the hands of a receiver. Several persons were convicted of fraud, including Ferdinand de Lesseps, who, 86 years of age, was probably in entire ignorance of the business details. He died soon after. In 1894, energetic work was recommenced by the new company, which continued operations until the Americans took possession, May 4, 1904. $225 million had been spent upon the work, for which the United States paid $40 million. Recently, it was estimated to have been worth $42,799,826. The advantages of the Americans over the French in having political control of the region, modern sanitary methods, better means of excavating, and unlimited money should be considered. And due credit and admiration should be awarded by all to de Lesseps and the Frenchmen who did so much, according to the verdict of praise rendered by our own engineers. The Panama Canal. In June 1904, Chief Engineer Wallace, Colonel W.C. Gorgas, and others sailed the isthmus to pursue the great work, which had been transferred to the United States, May 4th, by the French. Digging in the Culebra Cut was continued, but the chief labor for 2 years and a half was to remedy the unsanitary conditions, to provide accommodations for the employees, to perfect the organization, to reconstruct and double-track the railroad, and to improve the terminal facilities, necessary preparations for the colossal task. The sanitation of Cologne and Panama included repaving, sewerage systems, and fresh water supply as a part of the war against yellow and malarial fever. A proportionate sum spent on sanitation in the United States would be $12 billion a year, 1/3 of the entire amount devoted to all government expenses. Since January 1907, the work has progressed rapidly, so that the canal is expected to be completed and in operation some time before the date of its formal inauguration, January 1st, 1915. In spite of being hampered in many ways, much valuable work was accomplished by Chief Engineer John F. Wallace, who resigned after 1 year, and by his successor John F. Stevens. He serving until 1907 is said by Colonel Goethals to have laid out the transportation scheme in a manner which could not have been equaled by any Army engineer. The engineering skill and the great administrative ability of Colonel George W. Guthels, chairman of the Isthmian Canal Commission, chief engineer, president of the railroad, governor of the zone, etc., are so well known and already so highly honored as to need no encomiums here. The length of the canal, from deep water on one side to the same on the other, that is, from the Toro Point breakwater on the Atlantic side to Naus Island on the Pacific side, is about 50 miles, 40 miles from shore to shore. From the Atlantic entrance, by a channel 41 feet deep, with a bottom width of 500 feet, it is 7 miles to Gatun, 2/3 of which is in Limon Bay, the rest apparently along a fairly broad river. At Gatun, as everybody knows, are the locks, a double series of 3, by means of which the ships will be raised 85 feet to the level of Gatun Lake. This, with an area of 164 square miles, is without doubt the largest artificial sheet of water in the world. The lake naturally has a widely varying depth and a highly irregular shape, with large and small arms, promontories, and islands. But vessels may sail at full speed along a channel from 500 to 1,000 feet in width for a distance of 24 miles until at Bas Obispo the Culebra Cut is entered. This, about 9 miles long, has a bottom width except on the curves of 300 feet only, making a slower rate of speed necessary. At Pedro Miguel, the ship will be lowered by one lock to a smaller lake covering 1,200 acres, 30 feet below. A mile and a half beyond, at Miraflores, the ship, by means of 2 locks, will return to sea level. Thence sailing on, 8½ miles more, out into the Pacific. The sail from ocean to ocean will to all be of intense interest, though more highly appreciated by those who visited the region before it was submerged, watched the great shovels cutting away the range of hills which forms the continental divide, and saw the locks in process of formation. The Great Gatun Dam seems a wonderful creation, though the only remarkable feature is its size. It should be borne in mind that the extensive surface of the lake among the hills does not cause any greater pressure upon the wall of the dam than if it covered but a single acre, the depth of the water being the determining factor, not the extent of the surface. The dam is nearly 1.5 miles long at the top, half a mile wide at the bottom, 400 feet at the water surface, and 100 at its crest, designed to be 105 feet above sea level and 20 feet above the normal level of the lake, a very wide margin of safety. Of the entire length of the dam, only 500 feet, a small fraction, 1/15 of the whole, will be exposed to the maximum water head, 87 feet. The thickness of the dam is greater than was deemed necessary by engineers, with the result that there is no seepage, but it was thought best to satisfy over-apprehensive congressmen by the employment of excessive caution. The interior of the dam is an impermeable mixture of sand and clay, obtained by dredging above and below, placed between 2 parallel ridges of rock, and ordinary material obtained from the steam shovel excavations. The upstream slope of slight grade is thoroughly rip-rapped, 10 feet below and 10 above the mean water level. The 21 million cubic yards of material composing the dam, which covers 400 acres, is sufficient to build a wall 3 feet high and thick, nearly halfway around the world. The Gatun Lake will receive all the waters of the Chagres Basin of 1,320 square miles and will contain at its ordinary level 206 billion cubic feet of water. An outlet, an obvious necessity, is provided in the spillway, a cut through a hill of rock nearly in the center of the dam, southwest of the locks. This opening, lined with concrete, is 1,200 feet long and 285 feet wide, with the bottom at the upper end 10 feet above sea level, sloping down. Until the construction of the dam was well advanced, the water from the Chagres and its tributaries flowed out through this opening. Then it was closed at the upper or lake end by a dam of concrete, 808 feet long in the form of an arc of a circle, its crest 69 feet above the sea. Upon this, 13 concrete piers rise to a height of 115.5 feet, with steel gates by which the water level of the lake will be regulated. The immense double locks deserve more than a cursory glance. Similar in construction and dimensions, each has a usable length of 1,000 feet and a width of 110 feet. The chambers have floors and walls of concrete, with mitering gates at each end. The walls, perpendicular on the inside, are 45 to 50 feet thick near the bottom, but the outer walls narrow from a point 24 feet above the floor to a thickness of 8 feet at the top. The middle wall separating the double locks is 60 feet thick and 81 high, with both faces vertical. But in the upper part, it is not solid. A tunnel in the wall has 3 divisions, the lowest for drainage, the middle for electric wires to operate the gate and valve machinery. The highest as a passageway for the operators. An enormous amount of concrete has been employed for the locks, 4 million or more cubic yards, with as many barrels of cement, enough to make a sidewalk 9 feet wide and 6 inches thick, more than twice around the world. Matching the walls are immense steel gates, 7 feet thick, 65 feet wide, and from 47 to 82 feet high, with a weight of from 390 to 730 tons each. At the entrance to the locks are double gates, also at the lower end of the upper lock in each flight, in case of ramming by a ship accidentally breaking through the fender chain. For there are 24 chains in addition to the gates, to prevent the gates being rammed by a ship under its own steam or having escaped from the towing locomotive. The chains will be lowered into a groove to allow the ships to pass. Ships will not be permitted to enter the locks under their own steam, but will be towed through by electric locomotives, usually 4 to each vessel, 2 ahead and 2 astern, the latter to keep the vessel in the middle and in the right place. The gates and valves are also operated by electricity, with power obtained through water turbines from the head created by Gatun Lake. The locks will be filled and emptied by a system of culverts, one of which, about the size of the Hudson River tunnels of the Pennsylvania Railroad, 18 feet in diameter, extends along the side and middle walls, with smaller branches under the floor of the locks. The water enters and leaves by holes in the floor. The culverts are so arranged as to economize water by passing it from one twin lock to the other. To save both time and water, each lock chamber has a single gate near the middle, dividing it into two parts, only one of which will be used for vessels less than 600 feet long. To fill and empty a lock will require about 15 minutes. To pass through the three at Gatun, about an hour and a half, and as much more to go down the locks on the Pacific side. The entire passage through the canal will occupy 10 or 12 hours, according to the speed of the ship, in the narrower parts all being obliged to go slowly. While it is hoped that the first steamer will pass through the canal in December 1913, if not earlier, there is no expectation of its being open for general traffic before the summer of 1914. Cologne. Passengers arriving on a Panama Railroad steamship at Cristobal, practically a part of Cologne, may find waiting on the dock a special train to carry them across the isthmus. The tourist en route to a Pacific port, with his heavy baggage checked through, may let that go on to Balboa, the place of embarkation on the other side, and himself remain with hand luggage to look about Cologne. Tourists on other steamers land at a Cologne dock, from which it is a 5 minutes walk to the railway station. Men and boys are about to assist with hand baggage. All that is checked through should be transported to Balboa without personal care, but the cautious traveler will have an eye upon it to see that it goes to the station here and aboard the proper steamer on the Pacific side. Hotels. Washington. Rooms $3 per day and up, December 1st to June 1st. June to December, $2. Meals $1 each or a la carte. Imperial Hotel or Park Hotel. Carriage fare, 10 cents for one, 20 cents for two, 25 cents for three, 30 cents for four. By the hour, 75 cents for one, $1 for two, and so on. Regular trains for Panama as of June 1913 at 5:10 and 10:30 a.m. and 4:25 p.m. Time 2½ hours. Inquire as to special sightseeing trains. Landing early in the morning, one may have sufficient time to look about Cologne and Cristobal before taking the afternoon train to Panama. Those planning a longer stay to enjoy some of the excursions available will drive at once to the new Washington Hotel on Cologne Beach, near the site of the old house of that name, which, giving way to its stately successor, now stands in the rear of Christ Church, and there fulfills its original purpose to supply lodging for the railway employees. The new hotel, built of hollow tiles and reinforced concrete in a modification of the Spanish mission style, is quite up to date with baths, electric lights, lounging rooms, etc., broad verandas on the side towards the sea, and a pretty garden between the house and sea wall. A swimming pool has been constructed nearby, 100 by 125 feet, from 3 to 9 feet deep, open on the seaside, where a baffle wall protects it from rough water. In 1903 I looked at the water with longing eyes, but the numerous sharks deter most persons from venturing into the ocean. The hotel, with some rooms with bath and others without, accommodates 175 persons. Like the Tivoli, it has no bar, and since April 24, 1913, there are no saloons in the zone outside of the cities Cologne and Panama, which except for sanitary regulations are under Panamanian control. The hotel enjoys a breeze all the year around and is said to be as cool as Bar Harbor in July and no warmer in winter. But it did not seem that way to me when I spent a few days in Cologne in 1903, the excessive humidity rendering the heat oppressive. In the center of the garden in front of the hotel is a rather ugly monument, a red granite shaft on a triangular base, bearing busts of John L. Stevens, Henry Chauncey, and of William H. Aspinwall, after whom Americans called the town for some years. To these three men in December 1848, a concession was granted by Columbia to build a railroad across the isthmus. The discovery of gold in California made it possible to raise money for the enterprise. Work began in 1850, and the first train crossed the continent January 28, 1855. The passenger and the freight trade have been both heavy and expensive, so that from 1852 to the present time, annual dividends of from 3 to 61% have been paid. Most of the traffic to California and Oregon was diverted on the completion in 1869 of the Transcontinental Railway, but good dividends continued. In 1881, the French Canal Company bought most of the shares, as the road was an obvious necessity to their work. It therefore came into possession of the United States government May 4, 1904, when the purchase of the French rights, work, and equipment was consummated. The city of Cologne, which the Colombian government very properly insisted upon calling after Columbus, is on the island of Manzanillo, formerly separated by a narrow strait from the mainland, a coral reef with a mangrove swamp at the back. Here in 1850, some shanties and stores were built by the pioneers of the railroad. The village grew and prospered in spite of the swampy location, which was improved by the deposits of rock and earth made by the French on the part now known as Cristobal for the homes of the employees. In 1904, there were 10,000 people in the town, 9,000 living in shanties on stilts in the terrible section back of Front Street. Now in Cristobal, Cologne, there are 20,000 people, and the place is drained and healthful. Just east of the Washington Hotel is the gray stone building, modified Gothic, of Christ Episcopal Church, dedicated in 1865. Built by contributions from the Panama Railroad Company and various missionary societies, it was at first American, after 1883 Anglican, and in 1907 again American Episcopal. Half a mile farther on is the fine Cologne Hospital with 525 beds, of course a commission affair. Built right over the water on piles a few feet high, one is almost tempted to be sick to be housed in so attractive a place. Beyond is the quarantine station, where persons coming from plague or fever ports are detained 6 or 7 days. The numerous people from Jamaica and Martinique will interest many. Their dwellings on the back streets, the drainage ditch, and Front Street lined with stores, where curios of a sort could formerly be purchased better than in Panama, bags or caps of coconut skins, heads carved from coconuts, and carved gourds large and small, the latter used as drinking cups. In Cristobal are dwellings of the canal employees. A large building occupied by the commissary department contains a cold storage plant, a bakery, and a laundry, which serve all the employees of the canal, the railroad, and the U.S. government on the isthmus. These with their families numbering at times 60,000. Also, there is a commission hotel, with meals at 30 cents for employees, 50 cents for transients, providing better fare than can be procured in most parts of the United States for the price to employees. And a YMCA building, which supplies a reading room, opportunity for games, and for social diversions including dances, lectures, and other entertainments. There are 5 other similar structures along the line. At the end of the point are 2 houses constructed for Ferdinand de Lesseps and his son, now moved closer together and devoted to offices of the commissary and health departments. Beyond is the statue of the great discoverer, the monument cast at Turin, a replica of one in Lima, presented by Empress Eugenie to the Republic of Colombia to be erected at Cologne. Columbus is represented in attitude of explanation to an Indian maiden personifying America, whose face expresses wonder and alarm. Portobello. With time to spare, an excursion may be made to the beautiful harbor of Portobello, 18 miles northeast of Cologne, where the Commission has been operating in a great rock quarry, one of the largest stone crushers in the world. Millions of cubic yards of rock have been taken from here, a smaller size for the concrete of the Caton Locks and Spillway, a larger size for the Cologne breakwater. Portobello and Nombre de Dios were the 2 safe harbors found by the Spaniards on this coast. The former has been a Spanish town since 1597. With a fine location, the town is considered unhealthy, having an extraordinary amount of rain, 237 inches in 1909. A tug leaves Cristobal Wharf every morning, returning at night. One has 2 hours or more to view the American settlement of 1,000 people at the stone quarries, and to cross the bay to the old village to see the finest ruins on the isthmus, an old customs house, old bridges, the remains of Fort San Jerome, and the old plaza. There is a population of over 2,000, with a church and stores. Some miles beyond Portobello begins the large section of country inhabited by the San Blas Indians, who have been smart and sensible enough to keep the white man out of their territory, thus preserving their independence to the present day. They come to Cologne to trade, but seldom allow a stranger to remain overnight in their territory. San Lorenzo Fort. Another excursion of interest is to San Lorenzo Fort at the mouth of the Chagres River, either by sea in a motorboat, or better in a canoe down the river from Gatun, a sail of 10 miles, during which one has a glimpse of the real tropical jungle. The sea route affords a better view of the old fort. The remains are very complete, an outer wall and a castle to be entered by a drawbridge. There are strong rooms, galleries for prison cells, manacles, etc., seeing which the tourist is apt to be more contented with his own lot. At the foot of the hill is the little village of Chagres. In front of Cristobal, a construction of 5 piers is being made, enclosing 10 docks capable of berthing ships 1,000 feet long, these being the Atlantic terminal docks for the canal. Across the bay is Toro Point. From this headland, a breakwater has been constructed to protect the canal entrance and Limon Bay from the violent northers which occasionally visit this coast. It will also reduce the amount of silt to be washed into the dredged canal. From Toro Point, the breakwater extends northeast for a distance of over 2 miles. The bottom width varies with the depth of the water. At the top, it is 15 feet wide and 10 feet above mean sea level. A double-track trestle was first constructed, from which carloads of rock were dumped into the sea. The cost is about $5,500,000. It has recently been decided to construct an additional, though smaller, breakwater on the Cologne side, extending west some distance north of Cristobal Point. Fortifications for the defense of the canal are being raised, both at Toro Point and on the east side at Margarita Island, 1 mile north of Manzanillo. Chapter 4: Cologne to Panama and Panama City. 4 daily trains in about 2 hours at 3, 6, and 10:40 a.m. and 4 p.m. Special train for sightseers, round-trip fare $4 from Cologne at 8 a.m. With barge service on lake, $1.50 extra. Guides for tourist parties to inspect canal, $7.50 per day, on application to railway ticket agents, Cologne or Panama. While the sail through the Great Canal will be an extraordinary delight, the railroad ride will also afford much pleasure. On leaving Cologne, the line passes various docks, the government printing plant, the marine shop and dry dock at Mount Hope, and the main storehouse of supplies for canal and railroad. On the east side of the railroad, opposite the warehouse, is Mount Hope Cemetery, where many French and others are buried, on a knoll which for a time was called Monkey Hill on account of the many monkeys there. These creatures are found in the woods all over the isthmus. Stone piers which may be seen on the east beyond Mindy were erected by the French for a viaduct with the design of relocating the railroad. This, obviously necessary for the Americans, has been accomplished at a cost of nearly $9 million. In the swamplands along here, much papyrus is growing. New Gatun. From Cologne to Gatun, a distance of 7 miles, the track rises 95 feet. New Gatun on the hill is a village but a few years old, the site of the ancient town now being covered by the dam. In 1904, Gatun was a busy place on the Chagres River, where sometimes 100 dugouts loaded with bananas would tie at the bank, and 7 or 8 carloads a week would be shipped. In former days, the railroad followed up the Chagres Valley, but now it is obliged to turn east to make a detour around the lake. It is desirable to alight here to examine the locks and, if possible, the spillway. Along the edge of the lock walls may be seen the cog rail for the towing locomotives, and farther back, the return track without center cog. Tall concrete columns along the top of the walls are the standards for electric lights to illuminate the locks. Tall towers, apparently lighthouses, are range lights on the center lines of the straight stretches of the canal, so that a vessel lining up with the tower would know it was on the center line of the canal. From the building on Gatun Hill, containing the office of the division engineer, maybe had the best view of the canal obtainable from any one point. Northward are the waters of Limon Bay, and the mass of shipping at Cologne Harbor are visible. Close at hand are the locks and dam, and a broad stretch of the lake. Leaving Gatun, the new road turns east along Gatun Ridge, then south with pretty glimpses of the jungle, crossing the Gatun Valley to Montelirio. From this point it skirts the east shore of the lake to Bas Obispo at the beginning of the Culebra Cut. Several immense embankments were necessary to cross the Gatun Valley section above the surface of the lake, and others were made for dumping the spoil from Culebra Cut near its north end. Half a mile beyond Montelirio, the railroad crosses the Gatun River by a steel girder bridge, 318 feet long, built in 3 spans, one of which may be lifted to permit access by boat to the upper part of the lake. Another steel girder bridge, 1/4 of a mile long, crosses the Chagres River at Gamboa, with the channel span a 200-foot truss. The other 14 plate girder spans, each 80 feet long. From this bridge, at the north end of which a new town site has been laid out, a glimpse of the northern end of Culebra Cut may be had. It was originally expected to carry the road through the cut, 10 feet above the water level, but the slides making this impracticable, the relocation has been made by cutting through a ridge of solid rock and working around east of Gold Hill, passing Culebra at a distance of 2 miles. Then the track runs down the Pedro Miguel Valley to Pedro Miguel Station, where it is within 300 feet of the locks. The highest elevation of the track is 270 feet above the sea, about opposite Las Cascadas. The Continental Divide is crossed 240 feet above the sea, in about the same line as Culebra. Journeying by the new road from Gatun, the old traveler or resident will miss some familiar names, the bearers of which, if not concealed under water, are now remote and vanishing. Lion and Tiger Hills were small hamlets, but Bohio was quite a place, where the French had a machine shop. It was once considered as a possible site for the locks and dam. Frijoles, beans, and Tabernilla have been places of some importance, and Gorgona of more, because here were the American machine shops, now removed to Balboa. The place with the peculiar name Matashin, which everybody remembered, will not be covered over with water, but like others farther on, will relapse into a small hamlet. The prevalent notion that this name was derived from matar, to kill, and chino, and was applied on account of the wholesale deaths of Chinese, is incorrect. It is the Spanish word, meaning a dance by grotesque figures. Bas Obispo, beyond Gamboa, is one of the old places still visible, at the north end of the Culebra Cut. Nearby, December 12, 1908, occurred the greatest accident in the construction of the canal, when 44,000 pounds of 45% dynamite, which had been packed into 53 holes, were set off by the explosion of one as the last hole was being tamped. As the hour was 11 o'clock, many men were passing home to lunch. The hillside, falling into the cut, as had been planned for a later hour, buried several men, and others were struck by flying rock. In all, 26 were killed and a dozen permanently maimed. Near Bas Obispo is Camp Elliott, where a battalion of Marines has long been stationed. Empire. Las Cascadas, where once a stream tumbled down a precipice 40 feet towards the Chagres, formerly came next, then Empire, one of the largest of the canal villages. Here the French began excavations in the cut, as previously mentioned, January 20th, 1882, before a large assemblage of officials of the Canal Company and of Panama. The work was blessed by the bishop, and the two common champagne celebrated the occasion. Culebra was the real capital of the zone after John F. Stevens in 1906 moved his quarters there from Ancon. Here has been the home and office of Colonel Goethals, the head of everything, and of other prominent officials. In 1908, Culebra had a population of 5,516, but is now much smaller. The side of the hill towards the cut has been gradually slipping away, taking a part of the village, but so slowly that the houses were first removed to the rear slopes. The average depth of the cut through its 9 miles of length is 120 feet. The heaviest point is near Culebra village, between Gold Hill on the east and Contractors Hill on the west, where the depth averages 375 feet. The summit of Gold Hill is 660 feet above the sea, of Contractors Hill 410 feet. Beyond Gold Hill is the troublesome Cucaracha Slide, though the largest is the one at the Culebra village on the west. One slide here involved 1,550,000 cubic yards. At this point, the cut is about 2,000 feet across. The dwellings of the employees here, as at Cristobal and all along the line, look very pretty and comfortable with their screened verandas. Market facilities have been good, with prices generally lower than at home for meat and other things brought in cold storage from the States. The climate is not objectionable to the majority, and many will be grieved when, the canal being finished and only a select few remaining for its service, they shall be obliged to return home again. Some, no doubt, being now weaned from excessive affection for one particular spot, will go on to other parts of Spanish America. There, intelligent men of the right spirit, who have saved a portion of their earnings, will find agreeable opportunities for work and for investments of various kinds. Beyond Pedro Miguel is the Miraflores Lake and the 2 Miraflores locks, by which the ships reach sea level again. After passing through a concrete-lined tunnel 736 feet long, Ancon Hill, overlooking the Pacific entrance to the canal, is straight ahead. One more station, Corozal, headquarters of the Pacific Division, and the city of Panama is reached. But I think we'll save our exploration of that city for the next time, and end this evening's reading from the South American Tour by Annie S. Peck, who was a most remarkable explorer and adventurer. I highly recommend looking her up and finding out more about her exciting life. If you'd like to read this work for yourself, as always, you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, you can drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.